So actually, I had a moment a few days ago to do kind of a pre-discussion and get kind of our feel what this panel is going to be like. And I made the joke after I just said hello to everyone. It just like started, and it was like dynamite going on. So I was like, we should have just recorded that and played it today, and then all of us made it in the audience too. So, but I did not think that far ahead. So this is where we're at. But what I can promise, though, is we're going to be talking about some spicy things, especially from a VC perspective and small businesses in this world, right? So I'm going to hand it over to our panelists to let them introduce themselves. Panelists, please introduce yourselves, name, organizations you're part of, but also what side of the aisle do you sit on? Are you on the small business side, VC, funding? Love to hear all that. So we'll start with Christine.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sure, I thought you meant politically. I'm post-partisan. And that's how I feel about capital allocation as well. So I have a pretty unique background, even as a capital allocator. I'm a general partner at J2 Ventures. We are very proud investors in SkyFi, which just closed and oversubscribed Series A. I think when you're a VC, you're just like a professional guesser and a hype woman. So I'm here to do that. But when I'm not allocating venture capital, I actually, before raising the fund with my partners, I was a political appointee with the first Trump administration, working for this U.S. Small Business Administration, and so spent pretty much the entire pandemic working on the Paycheck Protection Program, making sure that small businesses across the country, critical industries, could access various SBA products. So I just have a lot of empathy on both sides. I'm also the daughter of small business owners, so this is also just an issue that's so close to my heart. My background is a mix of public and private sector. Started my career as an early employee at Dropbox and Figma when they were still like Series A companies. Was on their cybersecurity teams. I was also a Fulbright scholar, working for Ambassador Max Baucus in China back in 2014. So bring a little bit of the China perspective here as well, and was inspired to work in government when the pandemic hit. And so for 2.5 years in government, was serving at the SBA until the end of President Trump's first term. And then I went back home to California, where I'm from, and served the city of San Jose as Chief Data Officer. Thanks for having me. It's great to be in Q Branch. It's my first time here.
That's great. Molly, how about you?
It's tough to follow that. That was a lot. I'm like, oh my goodness, okay. Molly Joyner, CEO and founder of Spring and Forge. I've been in defense tech almost 20 years. So started with Boeing, actually, primarily working with them and writing government contracts. So I'm probably on the side of the founder. It's where you find me, and also on the side of kind of how do we unlock non-dilutive options for startups. So that's good. I mean, I don't have as much pedigree by any stretch of imagination, but definitely done a lot of work both with the SBA and with a lot of state and local governments as well, which is really important, I think, as founders think about how they allocate capital.
Hi everyone, Allie Hawks. I'm the CEO of BMNT, and I'm really focused. I'm based in London, so we look at UK and Europe, and we do two things. So we have direct contracts into defense and intelligence, the UK. So for the past 6 years, we've won 36 contracts across the MOD and intelligence community, so I can understand how to break into the market in the UK and a bit of NATO. And on the other side of our business, we work with tech companies from the US or from Europe trying to enter the UK market. And then we do a bit of cross-border market entry into Europe, Germany, Poland, Baltics, and the Nordics. My background, academia, so my PhD is in military sociology. I've been in kind of defense and security for 17 years. I taught at the UK Defence Academy, so tri-service, strategy, policy, operations to our officers. Also held posts at Georgetown University, and I worked in the first Trump administration as well, in acquisition.
I'm Luke Fischer, CEO and co-founder of SkyFi. SkyFi is an Earth intelligence platform company, so we deliver geospatial imagery and analytics to global customers, U.S. government, big hedge funds all over the world. My background, 20 years total in the Army as an aviator. Most of that was on the special operations side. Got out. I was head of flight operations for a small company called Uber. Yes, Uber had flight operations at one point. And then I went to an electric aviation company called Joby, one of the leaders in delivering electric aircraft for passenger movement. And I think we're actually going to see some flights this year in Dallas, Miami, New York, and I think New Mexico somewhere. So keep an eye on that. Venture capital just for a little bit, and then started SkyFi about 4+ years ago. And and based here in Austin, Texas. So excited to talk to you.
Awesome. Let's give it up for the panelists before they get started. No, as you can hear, like we've got a very well balanced panel for you. So all aisles is what we were going after. So I'm really excited. But I thought we should start off with some neutral territory. So as we know, like everyone on either on the VC side or on the business side, it's like we want more customers at the end of the day, whether that's directly or through your portfolio. So let's level set for everyone. What is it like at this moment to do defense as business, as a VC, both locally and on the international level? We'd like to take that first.
I'll jump in right away from the entrepreneur and founder side. So I think it's one of the best times ever to get into national security and defense tech. We look at the past, I would say, couple administrations where national security has always been important, but you haven't seen really the dollars flow in the push for commercialization. Where we sit at SkyFi, we work with the Space Force a lot. And we're seeing that's one of the first services that were stood up under the first Trump admin that is buying commercial first. They understand they're not going to be able to build everything from where the commercial market is. And then, with those really tailwinds you see from a commercial first attitude, then you see the investors following. Last year when we closed our Series A, thanks great investors like J2, a bunch of others across the world. Once we started getting the government contracts, that really allowed the investment dollars to flow because you could see a long term. Because we were just starting with this Trump administration, they knew there was going to be years of more commercial, more privatization of where the innovation can truly come from is from startups that are really making a difference. So that's where I think, and especially as we go through Q3 and Q4 of this year, where a lot of these policies and the budgets are actually going to take effect, and we're going to see more of those dollars flow. I think it's a better time than any is right now to start a company.
Okay, jump in with kind of the European perspective on that. So I was at Tectonic yesterday, and it's really interesting to be back in the US and to kind of really everything you said just really resonates from what I've seen. The picture is really different in Europe. There are a lot of companies, US companies that are going over to Europe and we're helping them. But it's a really difficult and idiosyncratic market to navigate. So you have everything from Poland, whose armed forces are told not to talk to anyone from the outside. So how do you give them your demand signals? How do you talk to them about your problems? You've got 2 primes in Poland. So they have kind of a closed marketplace that's changing, and you have an influx of capital, an influx of talent coming back to Poland, wanting to start things, a lot of entrepreneurship. And there's a lot of investment, but where does that investment go? How do we organize our talent? How do we structure some of this investment? So kind of from the European perspective, we are behind in terms of understanding where we want to invest. There's also investors coming out of the woodwork who then are raising funds or they want to invest in defense, but they don't really have the background to understand what a sales cycle is when you're selling to the government, that you're selling to 5 people at all times. So my experience of selling into the MOD and intelligence community and also helping our customers is you're selling to the policy person, to the end user, to the senior leader, to the technical assurer. And then you have some antibodies, and then you have some evangelists around there. And any 3 of those people in that 5 customer cluster attrit, as you know, during the sales cycle. And so from my perspective is we are a little bit behind, especially the UK. We don't even have a defense investment plan, so we don't know what we're going to invest in. We can barely deploy a ship to the Middle East right now. But what's really interesting is that the UK is still a strategic asset if you want to go to Europe. So working with MAB, our special forces, or getting a contract with the Royal Navy, for example, will actually accelerate your market entry into Europe because it de-risks taking on a capability for European partners. I'll just stop there. Hand over.
Are we all answering this question? Are we just wrapping?
Whatever you all want to
Okay.
do.
Well, I actually would say, I don't take issue, but I would say, I don't know if the defense tech startups go into defense tech to make money. Like, I think they do it because there's a mission. They believe in what they're doing. They believe in what they're bringing to market. And then I would say that that's true for any founder, but especially defense tech. You don't do it because you want to make money. You do it because you believe in what you're building. And so if you have something fantastic and you have passion for it, it's going to be successful because you're going to have product market fit. Now, that said, I will add that on the U.S. government side, obviously right now is is a good time to be in business, especially if it's made in America for America. It's a winning message, and there's a lot of dollars flowing around that. Those types of things.
So I have the least amount of defense experience on this panel, and so I also was just learned a lot from hearing your perspectives. In fact, like honestly, I don't have any defense experience, but so usually like when my partners do, though we are qualified defense tech investors, but usually when I'm looking at this landscape, like I bring more of a maybe more of a private sector allocator lens to it. And I want to just provide maybe a more pessimistic perspective, right? Because I agree, all the trends you guys are flagging seems like things are trending up. But the one thing that I am seeing now that I have never seen before, or that's not true, like I just wasn't alive back then. Like I haven't seen this since like the Tennessee Valley Authority, and I was not alive back then, is the government actually, like they're picking winners and losers. Is this live stream? Whatever. Like these things are just happening. So I don't know if you saw in the news, right? But the Department of War offered a convertible note to L3 Harris a couple months ago. And then I think this week or last week, the Trump administration deemed Anthropic a supply chain risk. These are all headlines that are public. I'm sure everyone's been following it. That's unique. That's not I have not seen like as someone who like started my government career in China where everything was a state-owned enterprise. It's been unique and bizarre to kind of see government play this role in market economies. And maybe my only like pessimistic lens right to this is we have not seen this before. I do not know how this will affect private and public markets, and I don't know how it's going to affect the culture that we have here around fair market capitalism and fair markets.
Okay. Yeah, I think to counter a little bit about what you said about picking the winners and losers, for those involved in the drone dominance group, big initiative to get drones, private drones out, get warfighters using that. They had 25 companies come in that got selected, and then there was Gauntlet 1 where 11 got selected as final. They're going to get a whole bunch of money for it. There were some companies in there that were public companies, super well-funded companies that did not get selected. And I think if you go back a couple of years, those companies probably would have made it, even though their capabilities were less. So I think a little bit counter on a very specific tactical topic. We are seeing this commercial first. Let's go with the best product. We don't care about your funding, your lobbying groups, anything like that. The product has to fit in the warfighter's hands and be usable. And I think we're seeing that more now than ever and being really tested. We're seeing that in Ukraine. When you go to Ukraine, it's not like, well, if I can do this, then my product may work. It has to work immediately. Otherwise, you get one chance and you're done for that. So I think I agree. I also disagree.
Oh, that was great. Anything else on that particular like baseline, like where we're at, what it looks like currently in this industry before we get into the more spicier things of this? All right, let's go into the spicy side of this. So, of course, like VC funding is what we're talking about primarily on this panel, but there is other ways to get funding in this industry. And I think, especially for businesses out here in the crowd, it's like, what are those pathways before we start dissecting like the VC piece of this? Because I think it's fair to say that both sides are valid, but there's a right and a wrong way to do each side. So, I know Molly, you're an expert in non-dilutive funding. So why don't you give us like that perspective from the grant side first?
Okay. Well, first, we've all seen that statistic circling LinkedIn, right? 2% of startups get funded, VC funding. So chances of you getting funded are actually really slim. I think that's really important to level set that. So it's really good to think about, okay, how am I going after the market and revenue and money in different ways? So everybody's heard the term capital stacking. So how are you stacking your capital to make sure that you get to the next level, right? Beat the valley of death, all the terms that you see thrown around on LinkedIn. So I think I'll start at the beginning. You look at obviously the SBIR, it's gonna be Riyadh. What is happening there? How do I get my idea out the door, out the gate, and find some grant funding? Those are smaller checks, but they're good because they validate everything, and VCs love that. They're like, oh, there's validation. People want this thing. But then there's other ways to find funding. State and local, cities and municipalities actually have a lot of dollars to spend on things. There's R&D, there's tax incentives, there's credits. Are you looking at all those different things as a small business? There's also corporate grants, which I think a lot of people discount. but they can kind of be the difference between making payroll or not. So sometimes you can go after those also non-dilutive. So are we looking, even FedEx, I know this surprised Jerry, I was talking to him a little earlier, like they have like a $10,000 small business grant depending on the state that you live in. So that can sometimes be the difference between making it and not for really small businesses. Once you get traction and you're rolling, obviously revenue is your best investor. How are you finding those strategic partners and maybe getting POs, you're getting LOIs, and then now you can have people lend you money based on those, which is also important. So I think once you have those in line, you can start thinking about the larger government contracts, which are often like, phase 2, phase 3 SBIRs or beyond. Different contracts, going after different procurement vehicles, different contract vehicles, and starting to stack the dollars that way. So again, VC can inject at any one of those points in the timeline. And I will say, after you stack your capital in that way, oftentimes the VC money that you receive is smarter VC money because, again, most of us, not all of us in this room, but most of us are in hard tech. We're building a thing, and that takes a lot of time. And I think a lot of VCs don't recognize that. I know you do, but a lot of VCs don't recognize that. Like, hey, 5 years to an exit, woohoo! Like, okay, is that the right timeline though? And so thinking through those things and stacking appropriately. So.
Luke, like I was thinking as Molly was talking there, it's like, what is it from kind of coming from both worlds there? Like, what is your perspective between the difference between non-dilutive funding and the VC funding?
Yeah, I mean, if you can stick with non-dilutive funding, that's obviously great for ownership, business, but it really depends on the industries. I mean, VCs are there for a reason to take that risk, that calculated risk, and make the big, bold bet. And that's why, and I think a little bit counter to you, the innovation ecosystem in the U.S. is the best in the world because we see those risk takers and we can see the venture capitalists that are aligned with America, aligned with building, and have the capital that can do that. I mean, we've got a great center of gravity of capital here, fantastic companies that are making, multi-billion-dollar bets, and we're seeing multiple unicorns just in the Austin ecosystem alone. So, with that said, we took venture capital first because one, it was the right time to do it. It was a riskier bet, and we needed that. We had the right players, and just coming from the background and knowing that. But then, as things got rolling, the non-dilutive capital came in. The government work from Space Force and DIU, and now SOCOM, and other governments across the world have really funneled that. That's what really turned our fundraising process into warp speed. Was once we had some government contracts, that's more sustainable revenue. You see actual true dual use, which most of us in this room are very familiar with. I think some of the best companies coming out right now are actual dual use instead of just defense tech advertised as dual use, because you have to have that really big balance for everything. So that's right. I mean, non-dilutive is best if you can get it, if you know the grants, but I think unfortunately a lot of people, entrepreneurs don't know. They don't know the acronyms. They don't know the people, like how you get in. And, the days, thankfully, I think of SBIR mills just grinding through SBIRs with no end product getting to the warfighters are over. I mean, the SBIR mills?
They're like zombies. They're gonna.
Well, I hope they die. Yeah. We get pitched a lot like, I can help you do X. You don't actually do anything. Okay, I guess we're gonna live. I'll make it a goal to try to kill him and talk shit about it.
It's a safe space. Go ahead.
Is the camera rolling? Oh, it's not being live.
You'd say the same thing if it was.
Oh man, I don't want every comment I make to be like the more pessimistic view that
Why you're on the panel? Why you're on the panel?
Let's go.
Say it.
I also feel like, especially as the VC, like on the panel, like I really feel okay saying this. Like we've really like messed up some critical industries like in the past. So I think the best companies should be taking a mix of both, right? Like non-dilutive capital lets you preserve ownership in your company. It lets you run with full autonomy. By the way, like if there are any senators here, like we're still waiting for like SBIRs to get reauthorized by Senate. So, whether the mills will only exist if the SBIRs continue to exist. We need them back. I'm a little biased here, but we need SBIRs in this country. But I worry a lot about venture capitalists, like we are the ultimate source of risk capital. We take on the obligation of returning our funds within a certain period of time. And so any of our companies that take that money, they are inheriting those expectations. And so, Molly, I really appreciated your point about hard tech. you know, like it's hard to build gigascale factories. Like I was at Starbase yesterday, like watching basically SpaceX subsidize gigascale manufacturing with venture capital dollars. Like that is really hard. I don't know if you could just do it in 5 years, and we haven't been able to do it on those time frames. And so what I will sometimes worry about is critical industries, like especially companies that are crucial to like the national security supply chain. If they only take venture capital dollars, they also risk, I mean, they run the risk of those VCs exiting their positions. And the best example of that is actually what happened to the solar industry. Gosh, it's like 15 years ago, the US was the leader in solar. All of the solar R&D was like, it was all created out of US tech ecosystems, and they were all backed by like those material science companies were all backed by VCs. But during the '08 financial crisis, all of the VCs exited their positions. Like one of the reasons why China controls 96% of the solar supply chain is in part because American private equity and American VCs sold their position to Chinese private equity. There was no Chinese private equity until we sold those assets and kind of made a case for Chinese private equity. And I saw all of that when I was working for the State Department. And so I don't want like a repeat of what happened with solar, what happened with batteries, et cetera, and telecom. The list goes on to happen to our defense tech ecosystem. And so, you know, we don't believe that at J2, but it is really important to look back at history, see what happened to hard tech in the past, and make sure we don't repeat those mistakes.
Can I add one quick thing really fast? I'm sorry, I'll interrupt you. I was going to say, I think it's really interesting, and we should also talk about family offices, because I think that they get left out of the conversation a lot. But a lot of these family offices are starting to think about defense tech. They've already been thinking about it, but really thinking about energy tech. How do we align with some of these materials and supply chain and contested logistics type things? And that's a much more patient capital, which I think is something worth chatting about. I don't know if anyone else is. I don't want to hijack. I'm taking your job, but I just like to say my thoughts on that.
I was gonna ask because I feel like the odd woman out in the sense of I'm in a totally different market and we're having very different conversations on the other side of the pond. So just asking you guys, like, one, do you care about Europe? Are you investing in companies that want to go to Europe? And then what are you investing in? If you are investing in companies that are going there, is it autonomy? Is it advanced manufacturing? What is of interest? Because I can give, if anyone is interested, I mean, like raise your hand, give me an indicator. 1, okay, 2. Is 3, okay, 3 do. Or is that they are trying to build the manufacturing base. So when here we're talking about the type of hardware that we're building, we're on some critical assumptions of we have the infrastructure and we have the factories and we have the supply chains to build those things, and then we have the security assurance along those lines. In Europe, we have the people that are raising money, Onidrim, seed 50 million. They're going out to buy all the factories in Europe to make them that civil military fusion concept so they can increase, create efficiencies in their commercial production, but also kit them out to build component parts. And so everyone in Europe listened to Pete Hegseth very carefully at the last Munich Security Conference when he said, we are really no longer interested in Europe in the sense of floating all of you need to do it yourselves. So they're a year in and it's like, well, why would they know how to do it themselves? Because they haven't done for a long time. So the interesting thing is like we're in the basics in Europe, like we need to build the factories, we need to invest in the factories, we need to remove China from our supply chain. And then we need to understand how to do all of these things and continue to create partnerships and interoperability with the US. And that is what Europeans are trying to think. So how do we have this kind of almost this bipolar of like, we need to do it on our own and sovereign supply chains, but also we need to have interoperability so we can remain a really good ally of the US. So curious on the panel, like, does anyone give a fuck about Europe?
I mean, we do from a scale of business, but also employees, great employees, where there is no innovation base and startup community like there is here. So they're seeking out these American companies, and it's been a great source of talent for us. We're also in NATO Diana, which was very surprising because the U.S. didn't contribute to the NATO fund, and so when we apply, we're like, well, I think we might get it, and we got it, which is great. You see this strive for, there's quite a few really good U.S. companies in NATO Diana. Obviously, we're the best in there, but it's you see that drive for talent and the innovation that needs to get in through that ecosystem. So we very much embrace Europe. Except France from an employee standpoint. Never ever anyone from France.
Yeah. we care about Europe. And Ellie, you know this, like, I'm actually European by nationality. So, like, you know, my parents left China and went to Europe. But there's a reason why they left Italy to go to US. And it's because Europeans are, I mean, I think the strength of the EU is the multilateralism, right? Like, I think if executed perfectly, like, if you could sell to one EU country, you should be able to sell to all of them. But you know, the biggest problem is like they're too European about it. We have 3 companies, like we have 3 portfolio companies in Europe. We are actively allocating there. To Luke's point, I mean, some of the best deep tech talent ecosystems are based out there, but there are, I mean, like there are definitely some challenges even with working with the UK tech ecosystems. Like one of the biggest issues when I'm looking at early stage deep tech coming out of Cambridge, Oxford, Imperial, etc., is the fact that the universities own like 60% of the IP. So how are you? Like there's a reason why like some of the best deep tech companies we've seen out of Europe, they'll just exit to American companies or they become licensing mills or licensing shops, in part because there are these sort of inherent structural reasons why European entrepreneurs are not going to be incentivized to create multi-billion-dollar businesses. It's something that we're committed to helping overcome, but like I can't reform tech transfer policies.
Well, they just changed it.
Oh, great.
Sorry. Well, there's all the
Thanks,
universities.
thanks to you, Allie, probably. Thanks for doing that.
It's absolutely all me. They've agreed. They have a whole swathe of universities that have agreed to lower their IP stakes in spin out. So that includes Imperial. Imperial is raising a 400 million pound fund to invest in technology. Part of it is defense. So I think there is capital. You know, they're trying to find growth capital in the UK because it doesn't really currently exist. I think it's one of the best places in the world as a kind of like proving ground for talent coming out of the universities, and the technology is kind of second to none from spin out commercialization, but the terms are really burdensome, and so you have people like Quantum came out of Imperial and Bristol University, and the terms were too burdensome, so they went to Silicon Valley and raised 500 million. No one really does that in the UK, so I think interesting point, it's changing.
Great. Well, I love the fact that we're really like starting to talk about the international side of this as well as local. But in your opinion, you know, it's from a small business perspective, right? It's like not only do we have to figure out our own government and our own our own way to do contracting, it's now we're adding another level of complexity. So like in your own opinion, like do you think just the bureaucratic processes and them being different between the two is just it's primary like our barrier to get more businesses in the space where, you know, even from the VC side coming from Europe, right, looking into US companies or vice versa, right? It's like there's so many walls and red tape that we have to deal with, so it almost gets in the way of it. Do you agree with that, or do you have a different stance with that? Well,
I mean, I can definitely jump in really quick. It's a disaster. Truly, like it really is on both sides. So how do you navigate SOCOM and SpaceWorks and NAFWorks and APRL and who am I talking to here and are they a colonel? Are they a general? What level? You know, I think someone over there was like, what do I wear to a meeting with the military? I love that. I was like, that's fantastic. You know, the thoughts, right? But how do you navigate the funding and how you actually unlock it? And I think it's really tough. And I tell a lot of our founders kind of three things, and hopefully you find this helpful. One, what is your goal? What are you trying to do? Don't just jump on the first, they wrote an RFI, there's an RFP, I'm going to write for it. Because ultimately it has to fit with what you're building. Just does. And if it doesn't exactly fit or it's going to distract or take you in a different direction, then it's not worth pursuing, even though it's money. And I think a lot of founders jump on that first thing and they're like, oh, great, I could do this. It's like, whoa, take a deep breath. Like maybe it's not the right fit. That's the first thing. The second thing is use your tools. Mission Cultivate, use LinkedIn, use these different communities and forums to meet the right people. Because at the end of the day, a lot of these folks who are in the military, different branches, they're in government, they're on LinkedIn, they're in all these different social networking platforms, and they're watching and they're looking. And if you can meet the right person, some of them might even be in this room, and talk to them, it'll help you navigate that process faster and easier. So that's the second thing. And the third thing would be try and as hard as it is, to think about your honestly defense tech strategy first. I was telling a founder in the room this earlier, and then let the commercial happen after that. If you're dual use, amazing, woohoo! But defense tech first, especially in the States, because the commercial side of the house, in my experience, and it's just that, it's my experience, will follow fast. But if you start with commercial and then try and break into defense, it's really tough to go back that way. So those are the things that I would say.
Yeah, actually, on that last point, I disagree. Just from industry perspective, where I think if you're building a defense-focused company, that is the values, the mission, the speed. I think it's almost impossible to go to the commercial world for it because that speed cycle is not there. You're not getting that rapid feedback. Customers aren't really engaging at the level you are when you have government contracts. We went commercial focus. I mean, again, I think it's industry dependent, of course, but we went commercial first. Got a ton of feedback, and then went to the DoD. We had a lot of experience, a lot of reps, a lot of feedback. Because once you get a government contract like you are now, you have maybe quarterly touch points. Where in the commercial world, it's daily. You're getting punched in the face on LinkedIn every day, like Twitter, Reddit, like Discord. Like, hey, this sucks. This sucks. That's what you need as a company. So I think it really depends. But I think more importantly, it's the values you set up and the speed of operations. If you're defense tech, it doesn't compute with commercial. Where commercial, you almost have to like throttle back a little bit from perspective like, hey, this is going to take a long time. It's going to get quarters upon quarters to get the contract signed, and the milestones are very deliberate. Then on the acquisition side, I'll be quick. I think most of us have sat on panels, listened to panels for probably a decade plus, and every panel says about how hard the acquisition process is. It is hard, it is difficult, it is changing, but there's very clear pathways for funding. I think entrepreneurs, for the most part, get frustrated when they don't get government contracts, probably because their product sucks and probably because the warfighters don't actually need it. You invented something cool, you've never talked to a warfighter, you've never been a warfighter, and you're surprised why it doesn't work because you think it's the greatest thing. And I think what we're actually missing in the ecosystem is not more innovation units, more funding pathways. It's warfighter feedback that is actually usable and tangible that gets up in a very deliberate way, and that feedback cycle can be there because that is what we're really missing. I guarantee you go to a warfighter, they have really no idea about DIU, MIU, SBIRs, anything like that. They're just like, I get handed a piece of tech and I use it, and if it works, great. And like, how do we jump that bridge to go notify startups of what they actually need? I think it's very important.
Just jumping on that again from a bit of a different perspective, I think this is where Europe does have a bit of an advantage, is that the proximity to Ukraine and the ability to go to Ukraine and test their kit and capability. And you'll find that parts of the MOD in the UK are oriented around a couple of questions to a company that comes to them and pitches, which is the questions they're going to ask are, have you been to Ukraine? What is the data? And can I talk to the end user? And if the answer is no, they'll say, come back when you've done that. And so they're using Ukraine to test and de-risk those new capabilities that are being developed either in the US or in the Ukraine. And the interesting thing that kind of pulling back a little bit is I think that there's a big bubble around some of this hardware, especially around drones. And when the export law changes in Ukraine in the next few weeks, where they can now export their technology to Europe and further afield, I think you're going to see some really fierce competition of capabilities that actually work with the data behind them. Whereas now we're fielding things and we're testing them and doing T&E and we get good feedback, but it actually hasn't been on the battlefield yet. And you're going to see a flood of capabilities coming out of Ukraine that have been on the battlefield that are kind of the capital allocators that are kind of circling around ready to invest in them. And I think that's going to disrupt the market a little bit from a European perspective. And the other point I was going to make, kind of jumping around here, sorry, is like the valley of death that we talked about. I actually think the valley of death is a good thing. Can you imagine all the bullshit that we would have if we didn't have the valley of death? Like, we would die from the applications. And, when you said, like, maybe if it's not very good, if you're not getting a contract, there's so much vaporware right now because there's such an interest in defense. And so you have a lot of amateurs that are developing things. And I think the valley of death is actually conceptually really sound. We need the ability to kill things. I just think it doesn't happen soon enough in terms of prioritizing the problems that we're trying to solve. And a lot of the companies that we work with, you made the point of like, what is your strategy against what are the funding opportunities? There's a lot of companies that we meet, they have a really good idea and they go and pitch it. And guess what? No one has that problem to solve. And so really focusing on what is the problem you are trying to solve and then building to solve that problem using the customer's language gets you a lot further, but also to be able to get that user feedback. I've been in a lot of pitches where there's very passionate founders that are kind of pitching in language that the government customers like, that sounds super cool, but I don't know what you're saying. So taking the time to understand your customer, I think, is really key and a big mistake that I've seen here.
I just want to say, all right, so I agree with, I really agree with Ali and Lou's point. And although, Molly, to your point, like, I think defense first does make sense for certain types of industries, right? Like, we've invested in a chip scale atomic clock company. It's dual use, but very much, the initial adoption is going to be from the DOW. I want to frame it also in terms of market efficiency and cost. I think the reason why many of our companies tend to be commercial first is because we just think commercial and especially consumer markets. Luke, you and I spend a lot of time in consumer tech companies. Anybody who's ever tried to call an Uber, most people also will pull up the Lyft app, sorry, just to chat, right? Like, that is the perfect example of market efficiency because there's something about, like, when you're trying to build for an efficient market, like commercial, like consumer, you have to do it at a better price point. And I think, just with the wars that are going on right now, right, in the Middle East, in Eastern Europe, and maybe the wars of the future, right? It's actually a price around it's around unit economics. It's not about just shipping the best possible technology. It's about shipping it's the best tech relative to the price, right? DJI drones it was actually consumer tech. You can buy DJI drones at Costco. It's only like $350. So $350 drone can destroy $30 million equipment. Like, it's really a war around cost. And so, when we like to encourage people who want to build dual use to start with commercial, because you have to start with markets that would push you to offer the best possible capabilities at the lowest price point, which, I think that has been SkyFi's journey.
Great. Checking in with our host. Do we have time for one question? All right. Anyone have a question? I saw you first in the back. So, let me bring you by.
So I really appreciate the enthusiasm about America because I am an American. I'm a 33-year Army colonel retired. But the data does not show this is the greatest time to come into defense tech. I'm sorry. We're confused out here. Like, does anybody know the difference between all the PAEs and what T2 Kong is and is not doing and what Capital Factory just reinvented up the street? You can't figure that out. And then will the silver mills turn on? I mean, some people don't care because you've already got your money, so you're running to the bank.
I want
The terrific thought process about redoing the middle ground in America, but nobody in this administration, last term or this term, ever proved they could do what we have back. Let's do 3-4 years ago. We had bipartisan agreement. We had EIU humming. We had silver mills on. We were rocking at full scale. And what did we do? What did we do as a nation? We just unraveled it for no reason. And so, while I love the defense tech, obviously, Mark and I are good friends and we do great things here, we've got to turn this around. What we're doing right now, from strategic to tactical, does not work.
And I want to ask that question.
So the question is, I get the reason to say it's a great time to come into defense tech. I don't think so. Tell me beyond, like, I work for several defense contractors right now who are paused because of this thing called Iran that we didn't need to go in and pull their coverage. But why is it the best time to get into defense tech? Like, take a different perspective. I heard what you said first off.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, definition of what unraveled means, what's working better previously as opposed to now. I think from our landscape and the geospatial industry and the government contracting aspect, we're seeing a lot more commercial first and faster to contracts. And I actually think that we're seeing a push against the defense primes, which I think is absolutely the best thing because they're so entrenched in the industry and it's really hard to compete. Previous administrations, like, you didn't even have a chance as a startup. Now we do. And so I think we're at the great time. There's the funding pathways. We're getting better at getting warfighter support up to us and the engagements with warfighters. We're seeing the whole change from T2COM, PAEs, program executive officers actually embracing it. There's more open doors. Katie, who leads my government, her and I were just at SoftWorks in Tampa. And I mean, you can literally walk into these buildings. You can walk into DIU. I was at DIU for 4 years and I've seen their change. They got $1 billion worth of funding. That's fantastic because they're funding companies. Company I used to work at, Joint Aviation, started out as a small DIU contract, and now they're worth multiple billions and going to launch commercially across the world. So that's what I look at from my personal experience and being on the warfighter side and on this entrepreneur side, where I do think it is great. And I see we've got companies like Saronic, like a whole bunch in just the awesome network that are becoming unicorns. And of course, there's a lot of hype and flair around a lot of these companies, but still, that's where you see this national security, but more importantly, commercial first for a lot of reasons. So.
I think too is that with the influx of capital, you are bringing people who otherwise would not think about defense to the table, and we're benefiting from their great ideas. So, a company I work with, Tiberius Aerospace, the two founders had nothing to do with defense before. Very experienced founders. They self-funded the development of a ramjet missile that extends the range of a howitzer from 24 kilometers to 150 kilometers. If we weren't pumping money into defense, they never would have shown up. They then have a multi-launch rocket system. They're now launching a software that is kind of a defense 3.0, rethinking how we do defense. So it's not just about the hardware we're developing, it's that we're recreating an ecosystem that is now thinking differently and bringing in kind of invention and innovation to a scale that otherwise we wouldn't have.
Oh, so basically you're saying you don't think it's a good time to be in defense tech is what you're saying. That's not loud and clear from the back. I'm going to say it's not a choice. I mentioned that previously, but I don't think it's actually a choice that founders make. I think if you get into defense tech, and I'm going to double down again on my answer of defense tech first, you're in all the way. Like I am with the founders day in and day out. They're building something because they believe in it, because we need it. And they have been war fighters. They have been on that side, and they understand what tech needs to be in their hands to save lives, to do the right thing. I know you know that, Brian. You served for many, many years and you get that. And so I don't think it is a choice, and I don't think we can just give up because some things unraveled and it's not as good as it was 3 years ago. I think we need to double down and go all in and push through it together. Because I think, again, I'm going to end with like, okay, a feel good moment, but it's a tight knit community. The defense tech community is, and all the different people that we know. I mean, South by Southwest is massive, but there's like a really tight knit group here. And I think that together we'll make it a better time to be in defense tech.
It's also just not a choice, right? To your point, the geopolitics demand it. I think we are very much right in the Cold War with China, but if you think about like the Cold War with Russia, I mean, the Cold Wars were fought through proxy wars. It was why people was really interested in chess, right? Like it was a big deal when Bobby Fischer beat Boris Spassky in Russia. It was like, you guys watch like Marty Supreme's like why table tennis really mattered in that movie. And I think a lot of what we're doing now, right, which is building defense companies, investing in defense companies, like this is the new proxy war. And so whether it's a good time or not, this is happening in part because we're responding to the market, responding to what's happening around the world.
All right, let's give it up for our panelists today.